I couldn't swear that it's the first time I heard the music, but my first memory of Mahler is very, very clear. I was 9 years old, and my parents decided that it was time for me to hear all the symphonies of Mahler. And the New York Philharmonic was playing a Mahler festival in Carnegie Hall in, I think it was September, October, in 1976. I was 9 years old, 9.5 years old, and they bought me a ticket, and I heard all the symphonies of Mahler. I think the first symphony that was performed was the fifth, and maybe because it was the first, or maybe because there was the incredible trumpet solo that really struck my 9-year-old fancy. That's the one that stayed with me. But I did hear all the symphonies, and it was back when the seats in Carnegie Hall were not reserved for the boxes. So whoever came first had the front seat in the box. Now they're numbered, and you have to sit in your numbered seat. But I would make my father get me to the concert early, and I would run up the stairs, and there was one other young guy who wanted to be in the front as well, and we would race up the stairs, and it was always the two of us in the front of the box. And that was probably a life-changing experience for me to hear the Mahler symphonies. I certainly have loved Mahler since then, and it's incredible to me now to think that I'm actually conducting these pieces that I heard at such a young age. Well, I've always felt that the New York Philharmonic has an innate understanding of the music of Mahler. What I like about them is they really bring great feeling to everything they do. The thing that I find amazing about Mahler is that it can really withstand many different approaches. You can hear convincing performances of Mahler that sound very, very different. Some conductors say that with Mahler, all you need to do is follow the directions, because the scores are so carefully notated, and he was such a wonderful conductor himself that he actually knew what he wanted. So if he says slow down, you slow down. If he says don't slow down, you don't slow down. I mean, it's very clear what he wanted. But that having been said, there's an incredible range of possibilities in the way you approach Mahler, and let me just talk about what performances I've heard. I've enjoyed performances of Mahler by the Vienna Philharmonic. You somehow feel that the folk aspect and the traditional Austrian dances are just so natural here, and then you might hear a British orchestra play, and you don't have that same sense, but there's a clarity that might be really telling for the music. When New York plays Mahler, the New York Philharmonic, I think there's a wonderful mixture of these. There's a kind of probably intuitive understanding of the folk side, but it's not as pronounced as when you hear, say, the Vienna Philharmonic play. But I do appreciate in New York this deep feeling of pathos and of the life experience that I think that the orchestra really imbues every note with. Great orchestras bring something to the music that they play that really affects conductors, and I think the challenge and the secret to working with orchestras like this is knowing how to accept what is offered and not let it completely drown you. And I've enjoyed conducting many composers, but with Mahler there's definitely a special will that the orchestra has, and there's a current that you can't help but be swept along by, and it's really a pleasure to conduct music that the orchestra feels so strongly about, because I think they love to play Mahler, and they know that they sound good when they play Mahler, and so there's always a special energy, and no matter who conducts Mahler with the New York Philharmonic, and I've heard different conductors do it, you can still feel the personality of the orchestra coming through very, very strongly. And I think that's true of a number of composers, but maybe most strongly with Gustav Mahler. You can't really argue about his interpretations of Mahler, because they were his interpretations, and he was such a great musician and such a great man that you were convinced when you heard him conduct the music. But now that, I have to say, many of the the experiences I had with Mahler were first with him. Not counting that early Mahler cycle I heard when I was 9, but when I was really starting to become a conscious musician, if I can say that. Lenny was conducting the Mahler symphonies with the New York Philharmonic, and I heard him play and record first, second, third, fourth, fifth, many, if not not all, but most of them. And it wasn't until much later that I started to realize that there was another way to go about it. He imbued every note with such importance that sometimes, and this is not a criticism, but this is what I've realized when I've studied the music subsequently, sometimes you lost track of where you were in the piece. The form wasn't necessarily as clear as it might be, and what I try to do when I study the piece, although I would never presume to compare myself to Bernstein, is to remember how important it could feel at every moment, but also try to remember where I am in the piece and actually follow the long line. Mahler's music is about life as he saw it. It's kind of a lens through which you can see his philosophy and his metaphysical and philosophical approach. You know, he was obviously a great musician, but he was very interested in the great metaphysical thinkers, and he tried, I think, to create a picture of the world through his music. And he obviously was a very emotional person, and I think you need to play his music with obviously deep feeling. But I think if you get lost in that side, you have to make sure that it's not so effective, and you have to make sure it's balanced with a kind of clarity of structure, because it's very detailed music, and he took the trouble to create all these details and all these layers, and I for one find it very exciting when you can hear them. I've admired very much, for example, the Mahler performance of Pierre Boulez could not be more different from Leonard Bernstein. Very dispassionate, but really revealing. Study, no, but I've seen many of the scores, and it's fascinating. His own markings, and even his own scores. There are changes, I think, that haven't appeared in even the latest editions, and it's not clear whether he wanted them to be definitive changes or they were based on the moment. He was, above all, a practical musician. So if there was one musician in the orchestra who may not have been up to a particular line, he would put in another instrument, or if he felt some instrument wasn't playing loud enough, he would double it somewhere else, or add a percussion impact to emphasize something. And it's not clear. I mean, I don't think we'll ever know for sure whether he wanted those to remain or whether that was just based on that particular week when he was trying to get the best performance he could. But it's amazing to see his brain, and his writing is so neat and so meticulous. He obviously was an incredibly thoughtful composer. Well, spent enough time studying the scores. I think it's very easy to listen to recordings these days and to hear what other people have done, and that can be informative and educational. But I do think that with any composer, but maybe particularly with Mahler, to look at what he wrote, since he actually knew what he wanted, and he was practical enough as a conductor and as a musician to make really useful markings in his score, to really know what he put down is absolutely crucial. You can't say that, as great as they are, say a composer like Schumann, when he had a certain effect in mind, he would write something that you have to interpret. You really have to figure out what he means. If he, for example, writes fortissimo for the whole orchestra, if everybody plays fortissimo, or what they think is fortissimo, you may not get the right effect. So it's important for each person to know what fortissimo for him or her means. With Mahler, he's very clear that okay, this instrument is playing mezzo forte with molto crescendo, and the person next to him has the same notes but sempre piano senza crescendo or something. And so he knows what the effect of the instrument is. So if he'll write, say, for the low register of the harp, he'll write a forte when the prevailing dynamic is pianissimo. He writes forte because he wants to make sure that's heard. The character doesn't become forte, but the balance is what he's going for, and that's all over the place. With the brass, he'll write, in a huge passage, the brass suddenly have subito mezzo forte, and you hear many orchestras simply ignore that because they think, no, this is exciting music, he must not have meant that, but he actually did mean that because there are other things that he wants to hear. So you can't only go on tradition, and you really have to go straight to the score, and that's probably the main piece of advice I would give to myself, actually, as well as to younger conductors. I think that's a very hard question. Certainly, I don't think I can answer it, but I guess that he wanted music to be really important for people, and he was a total musician in that he performed himself, and he performed his own music. He composed in a genius way, but also I really admire that he recognized the value and the quality of so many other composers throughout history, and I think music in life for him were basically the same thing, and he wanted kind of happiness. Obviously, he had tragedy in his life, and he wanted to express that through music, but he also wanted to transcend that through music, and he must have believed deeply in the power of music to represent life, but also to enhance life. And I'm hoping that was what was behind what he wanted. He wanted music to really be meaningful for people in their lives. I'm always interested in I mean, this is a very maybe mundane kind of musician insider type question, but I'm always curious about the tempos. What tempos he would have taken. Like, for example, the adagietto in the fifth. If it's a love song, should it sound drippingly sentimental and kind of pathetic, or should it have a freshness and a kind of eager, young, spring-like character? The tempo can affect that a lot. It's hard to read from the score. He says molto adagio and extremely slow, and I just wonder what those things mean, because slow is obviously a relative concept, and I'd be very interested to ask him, first of all, what he thought was the right tempo, but also how much latitude he would offer other performers. He didn't hear other people doing his music, and so I don't know if he thought of his music as sort of free to be interpreted, and I'm curious what he would make of the variety of approaches that you see today in interpreting his music. So I would ask him what he thinks about that.